Welcome to the Football Reporters. The Premier League makes way this weekend for the FA Cup third round. Does this offer respite for under-pressure managers, or does it ramp it up?
Marcus Rashford has been in the wilderness for a month, so what does his Manchester United future look like?
And across Manchester, what is happening with Jack Grealish? He was once a £100 million man, but now he's having been told to fight for his place with Sevilla.
And Ange Postecoglou faces a pivotal week with both domestic cups and North London derby action. I'm James Olley, and with me is Rob Dawson and Mark Ogden. How are we, lads?
We're good.
Any New Year's resolutions?
New Year's resolutions. I actually said that on the FC show I was going to shave my beard, but I've not actually got around to that yet, so I might wait. I might not do it. I've been told by my daughter not to, so we'll
Why?
see. I don't know.
Too much like Santa?
Maybe. Yeah, it's just getting rid of the flecks of grey, you see. I've got to think about these things.
There are products you can buy to fix that, the flecks of grey.
Yeah, I don't think I'll bother with that. But, I mean, you can let me know what you're using, but I think I'll stay clear of it.
I asked for that.
So let's start in Manchester, where Marcus Rashford was again absent from the Manchester United lineup. He was ruled out before the game with illness this time, and hasn't featured in the starting lineup since he scored twice against Everton on the 1st of December. Rashford's come out and said he's ready for a new challenge, while Ruben Amorim keeps trying to leave the door open publicly, at least, for a way back for him in nearly every media interaction he has. Rob, you've been reporting on this. Obviously, the story's just running and running. We're into January now. The window's open. Where are we?
Well, I mean, he's, as of right now, he's out in the cold. He's, like you said there, he's not playing. He's not being picked in the starting 11. He was named on the bench for the game against Newcastle, but was an unused sub, even though United were behind and, in theory, desperate for a goal, and just left on the substitutes bench. As far as Man United go, they are open to offers. We're in January, obviously you can move if a suitable offer arrives. United are open to permanent offers and loan offers, not ruled out talking to Premier League clubs. Would obviously like offers from abroad. At the moment, we're in limbo a little bit, and like you said there, it has been running for a month. It probably is going to keep running this story until the end of the January transfer window.
I mean, this feels like kind of deja vu all over again, although this time it's been played out publicly. But in the summer, United had the same stance. They were prepared to let him go, and they had no interest. There was no genuine interest in taking Marcus Rashford away from Man United, despite the fact that the club were prepared to listen to offers under Erik ten Hag. So 6 months on, it's the same scenario that he's available. Everyone knows he's available now. He said that he wants to... He's not said he wants to leave, but he wants a new challenge. It's the same thing. But, there are links with Borussia Dortmund, which could be a kind of repeat of the Jadon Sancho situation. Get him out of the club for 6 months, hope he can rehabilitate his reputation, score some goals, get some confidence back. But it's the wages. The big issues with Marcus Rashford are his wages, which is in excess of £300,000 a week. Huge wages, especially in the modern day where a lot of clubs are trying to reduce their wage bills. And the second thing is that his form is just not meriting his wages. So, everyone talks about his form after the World Cup when he came back from Qatar and had this great run. If you look at Marcus Rashford's figures dating back to the start of the 2021-22 season, he scored 5 goals that season. The season after that, he scored 30, which was his post-Qatar boost. The year after that, or last season, he scored 8. This season, he's got 7. So, really, that run of form after the World Cup was a real kind of... It's a bit of a freak. That's not Marcus Rashford. The Marcus Rashford that we know really is a guy that doesn't score many goals. And if he's not scoring goals, he's not performing well, he doesn't want to be there, but he's on massive wages, Man United have got a problem.
So where does he go? I mean, what are the most likely options this month?
His preference is to go to Spain. But obviously that opens up a number of different questions about who wants him, and who can afford him. Top clubs in Spain obviously are Real Madrid and Barcelona. Real Madrid have got probably the best array of attacking talent in the world. Is there a place for Marcus Rashford in there? Probably not. Mark's completely right. He's not a player right now worthy of moving to Real Madrid. Barcelona, I'm sure that Marcus would love to go to Barcelona. The problem is their financial situation. They're already struggling to register Dani Olmo. Everyone will have read the problems they're having midway through the season to re-register him for the second half of the campaign. That suggests that they haven't got the money to start talking to Man United, because the one stipulation that United have said privately is that they are happy to listen to offers, but they're not going to have a situation where they're paying all of Marcus Rashford's wages for him to play somewhere else. They're going to have to, another club is going to have to come in with an offer to pay, maybe not the bulk of the wages, but a big proportion of those wages to get that deal over the line. After those two clubs in Spain, you're looking at the likes of Sevilla, possibly. Anthony Martial went there a couple of years ago on loan in January and it didn't work out and he came back, had to look for another move later down the line. Beyond those clubs, and the Premier League. I mean, the Premier League clubs probably could afford him. They're the clubs with the money. You look at the likes of Arsenal, possibly. I mean, you know more than that about that. Tottenham, Chelsea, love a deal.
Spurs are the one that I know that they had an interest in him a while back under a previous manager, and they are looking to bolster those attacking options. Postecoglou kind of played it down when it was put to him. I think there was a press conference he did a day or two after Rashford had sort of come out and said, I want to leave, where he played down the idea of any interest. But I do wonder if late in the window, we know Daniel Levy likes to act very late in the window, if he's still available and suddenly United want to do a deal. It reminds me a little bit of when Arsenal took Sterling from Chelsea. That deal wasn't going to happen, and then literally deadline day, Chelsea dropped all of their demands right the way down from where they'd been all sort of all window to kind of say, look, we just need to get this guy out. Now, if that happens very late, I could see maybe Spurs.
Just one word on that though, wages. Even if Tottenham pay half his wages, you're talking maybe £175,000. I mean, I'd imagine that is probably Tottenham's highest earner.
They could do it. They
Really?
could do it. I mean, Kane was on 200. Son's on.
But Harry Kane's worth £200,000 a week.
Yeah, but I mean, if you're talking about, you want somebody motivated to prove themselves for 6 months, and you get to the end of the window where you feel you need an attacking option, I could see them saying, right, we'll commit that kind of money for 6 months because it does fit. You're right, it's at the top end, but it does fit within their wage structure. I mean, you can't really rule Chelsea out of doing anything because Chelsea love a deal.
But he's 27, and I suppose Chelsea don't sign players over 24, do they?
And they've already taken Sancho from United.
Yeah.
I don't think they need another sort of winger who's a little bit, inconsistent.
AC Milan's the interesting one because this has come out from Italy over the last couple of days, and when you dig into it doesn't really stack up in the sense that their best attacking players are both left-sided attacking players. You've got Rafael Leao, who's their big star but not been performing brilliantly, and Christian Pulisic. Now, Pulisic can play anywhere across the front three, but I'd imagine he would prefer to be on the left. Now, if you bring Marcus Rashford into that equation, that creates an issue unless they can let Rafael Leao go. But equally, Italy is not a place where you can pay big wages now because the loophole they had for players, overseas players, was closed earlier this year. So Italian clubs were able to get away with signing players on big wages because they had a favourable tax regime. That's gone. So I don't know how Milan do that deal. I really don't.
Just seeing as though you mentioned Sancho, there is a distinction to make between those two situations. When Sancho fell out with Ten Hag, United were in a situation where they had to get him out. So we ended up going to Borussia Dortmund, and they were happy to facilitate that move. They entered that January window with Sancho training on his own and getting changed in the reserve building. Entered that January window thinking that we have to get Sancho out by the deadline. That's not necessarily the case with Rashford. There is a scenario where
It'll get to
Rashford... It could do, definitely, but there is a scenario where it gets to the end of the window, and I think United are expecting this bubbling interest. And we talk about Milan, Borussia Dortmund, the Premier League clubs, clubs in Spain, to bubble along until the end of the window, and perhaps someone then will take the jump. But United are not ruling out Rashford staying beyond the deadline.
I mean, that is his best. In all the options he's got available to Marcus Rashford, staying at Man United is the best one because they'll pay his wages, he knows the club, and if he can get his head down and rediscover his best form, then he could be their star again. But there's a lot of ifs there, and Ruben Amorim clearly isn't sold on him. But I think the reason why I think it will get to the Sancho situation, not necessarily not training with the team, but because he has to get out. We were sat at the Newcastle game last week together, and United were struggling for a goal. They were 2-0 down with 20 minutes to go, and he brings Anthony on. Rashford stays on the bench. Now, that to me tells me that Ruben Amorim had. First of all, he didn't want Marcus Rashford to come off the bench and rescue his team and then put him in a really difficult situation whereby he had to play Marcus Rashford because he's the saviour. But secondly, it might say that I just don't want him around the club. I don't want him around the team. So they were desperate for goals and he stayed on the bench.
And that, to me, leads to a really important question, which is how important is it for Amorim, now that he's made this decision that he doesn't want Marcus Rashford, to get rid of him this month? Because if he stays till the summer and he's asked about him every 3 days, every week, is he training well? Why is he not playing? He could become quite a corrosive, element around the training ground, around the team. How important is it for Amorim and his authority that Marcus Rashford finds a new club?
Yeah, I think that's a key question because, like you said in the intro there, that Amorim, in terms of his public statements, is leaving the door open for Rashford to kind of come back into the fold and possibly be part of the team again. But judging on his actions, it looks like we're already beyond that, particularly the Newcastle game. Forget the rest of the kind of exclusions from the squad. The Newcastle game was ultimately it's a kick in the teeth, isn't it? He's only on the bench because you've got Fernandes and Ugarte suspended, and then you don't come on when in theory you need him. So then what do you do? When Ten Hag had this situation with Ronaldo and Sancho, the club backed him, and they ended up essentially ripping up those 2 contracts in different ways, ripping up the contracts. Right now, if you're Ruben Amorim, you're probably looking at Man United to give you proper backing and saying, well, if I've already made my decision on Marcus Rashford, you have to back me to whatever end this situation comes to. And if that means that his contract has to be ripped up, now that's going to cost an awful lot of money because, like Mark said, he's on an awful lot of money. He's on a contract till 2028, I think. You're talking about millions and millions of pounds in theory that Marcus Rashford is owed at a time when United haven't got any money at all, even really to do any January business. It's a massive, massive step. But if you put your faith in Amorim as a man to turn this whole club around, this is the kind of situation that you have to stand with him on.
To your point, though, what a distraction it is. I was at Anfield at the weekend and United got a good result, a positive result. They didn't win, but they didn't lose, and it was a good performance. That's the first time he's not been asked about Marcus Rashford after a game. There's no questions like, when is Marcus Rashford coming back? When they lose a game, is Marcus Rashford coming back? So if you get him out of the club, then that issue doesn't rear its head. If he stays beyond the end of this month, every time United have a negative result or they don't play very well, the question will be, you're going to play Marcus Rashford. So it suits Amorim to get him out of the club. And also, financially, I think we're all kind of agreed on this. I think Casemiro will probably leave this month. They'll find someone to take Casemiro. Anthony as well, maybe. If they can get Rashford out as well, you're talking about maybe freeing up. And they're not going to get Rashford off completely. So let's just say that by the end of this month, they have a £400,000 a week window on their wage bill every week. That would enable United to maybe bring in 2 players, because it's not so much about fees. It's about the wage bill. So if you can reduce your wage bill to the point where you can get a couple of players in, that is massively significant. And if United can get a left wing back or a left back, a forward in, then that would make a massive difference, and that would allow them to reuse the money they could get by getting Rashford off the wage bill.
I think it also is about the culture, isn't it? And the comparison. I don't think it's an exact comparison, but I keep thinking about what happened to Aubameyang at Arsenal under Arteta a few years ago. Again, winter window, stripped of the captaincy. There were different issues this time. It was more about being late for team meetings, a bit of ill discipline, basically not following club instructions when he should have been. Nothing major, but just a series of minor indiscretions that built up over time.
And all that applies to Rashford, basically. Yeah. Those things apply to Rashford, being late for meetings, going out when he shouldn't have been going out. So you're right, there is a comparison there.
And Arteta took the view, if we're going to create the right culture, a professional, improved culture at this club, we can't tolerate this anymore. It's a big call. And they ended up ripping his contract up and he went to Barcelona at the end of the window. But a lot of people at Arsenal still look back at that deal, ripping up that contract and making that decision as a really pivotal moment in sort of Arteta's evolution and control of the dressing room and as I say, building that culture that has taken them to the brink of a Premier League title from where they were, which is a mile away from that. Do you feel that this has the potential to be as significant for Amorim, given that he's not had really much time to train with the team? He's trying to impose himself. He's come into what's clearly a club that's stagnated in terms of its culture.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something in that. I don't think it's like for like with Aubameyang. I think there are different issues. I don't think Amorim needs to do it to get hold of the dressing room. I think he already has that. I think there's one issue there, and that's Marcus Rashford. And it would just do everybody at the club a favour to remove this kind of cloud that's hanging over the place. It's been there for a long time. It's not just this season, is it, Rob? It's been going on for probably a good 2 years, because Ten Hag had problems with him as well. So it's an issue that needs addressing, and there's all sorts of comparisons going back to when Sir Alex Ferguson did it with some high-profile players more than once. If there's a player that's causing a distraction and it's upsetting the camp in the sense that they feel that they're pulling their weight and he isn't, you've got to get rid.
I do want to stand up for Marcus a little bit as well, because I know that we're talking about, are United better off without Marcus Rashford? I actually think that also Rashford is probably in a situation where he needs a fresh start. And he has made mistakes, and you've referenced some of them there, and I think that's fair enough. And I think even Marcus, if he was sat here, would admit that he's made quite a lot of mistakes. But also, he hasn't always been treated particularly well by United. He's been trying to break through at the club at a time of massive upheaval, manager after manager who played him in different positions, often as a centre forward, and now he doesn't really want to play as a centre forward, doesn't really want to play on the right, he wants to play on the left, but he's been moved around, he's been criticised for his goal output, but then Solskjaer took penalties off him and gave them to Bruno Fernandes, which might seem minor to you and me, but to a striker who's judged on goals was quite a big thing at the time. I do think that perhaps we're at a situation with him where it would also do him quite a lot of good. He's become a little bit of a target from some fans, probably because he's come through the academy. The way he plays is sometimes a little bit kind of languid in the way that his body language is, but it's not laziness necessarily all the time, but sometimes it's just the way that he kind of holds himself. I just think that maybe a fresh start for him. Clearly he's a fantastic player, and we've all been at games where we've seen flashes of the talent that he's got. That yes, United at this point may be better off without him, but also for Marcus to find another club, another home, somewhere where he can actually go and show people exactly how good he is. I think that would be a good idea for
He's still their top scorer in the Premier League this season, alongside Bruno Fernandes, with 4 goals. And it sounds ridiculous, but 4 goals. So he is arguably United's best goal scorer, right? And I was at Anfield at the weekend, and Rasmus Højlund and Joshua Zirkzee. Højlund missed a great chance in the first half, a great chance, didn't take it. Zirkzee, right at the end of the game, chose to pass to Harry Maguire, who missed rather than take a shot. Now, a peak Marcus Rashford would have scored those chances. He'd have shot and he'd have scored. We haven't seen that peak Marcus Rashford for a while, and I've seen chances that he's missed like that. But still, he is the one player in that squad who, when he's at his best, would take those chances. And United haven't got a striker right now. But I just think that the ship has sailed long ago for the point where he could come back in and be the guy he was post-Qatar, or even when he burst out of the scene. I just think that, like you say, Rob, I think it's time for a change.
I think that the club have become disillusioned with him, and he's become disillusioned with the club. I think that's where we're at.
Let's hope then that maybe the 2026 World Cup can be a target for him if he needs to sort of fix a point in the future to aim towards. I mean, he's got a new manager. See, Thomas Tuchel's just started work, clean slate. You've got 18 months to try and get into a squad that's got a really good chance of winning a World Cup. Let's hope maybe that's the chance, the target he needs to reinvigorate himself.
Well, there's always a way back. Players have shown that in the past.
We're staying in Manchester. Jack Grealish, the £100 million man, has been told now to fight with Savinho for his place in the City team by Pep Guardiola. He started only 2 games since late November. He's only got 1 assist in the league all season. Rob, what's happened?
Well, I think it's very similar to the Marcus Rashford situation, in that with Jack Grealish at City, it seems like we're at a bit of a crossroads. He's been a favourite of Pep Guardiola in different seasons, particularly during the treble season, but has gradually kind of fallen out of favour. Pep is kind of a rhythm manager that he keeps picking the players who are delivering for him. It's not, he doesn't like sort of bringing players back in from the cold for no reason. They have to prove it to him. Grealish hasn't been playing recently, and then it culminates in Pep Guardiola after the West Ham game being asked about Grealish and sort of saying, well, I want the Jack Grealish from the treble season, and until he shows me that, he's not going to play. And you've got a situation where Savinho, who was brought in the summer, is finally starting to deliver on all that promise, and right now Savinho is first choice and Grealish is not.
Every time you watch Jack Grealish, on the rare occasions that he plays, it looks like the real Jack Grealish is kind of screaming to be let out. But the reality is that he's had to change his game, because when you sign for Pep Guardiola, you have to play a certain way. You have to play the way that suits Pep. And Jack Grealish is a guy that would get the ball, would dribble past defenders, would make things happen. But he's not really allowed to do that at City. And I think that frustration has set in. And I think it's made him a less effective player. I think he's frustrated by it. And I think obviously he's had injuries as well. I think there's differences with Rashford and Grealish in the sense that I think Rashford's a much more deep-seated issue. I think Grealish is, I think characteristically wise, I think he's okay with City and Pep, but I just think he can't offer what Pep wants. I don't think he wants to offer it anymore. I think he wants to be the guy that we all saw as a kid in the playground that brings a bit of joy to the game.
A friend of mine who watched Villa a lot when Grealish was there says, he's been turned into a robot by Guardiola.
Yeah,
and that is both a positive and a negative, in the sense of he's sort of polished his game up a bit, but actually, as you say, he's sort of stripped away a lot of the flair, the creativity, the sort of unpredictability from his game that makes him on his day brilliant and can make him not on his day very frustrating.
I think we saw it with those England games that probably you covered. Was it the Ireland game where Grealish in Dublin was playing in that central role and was fantastic, and he very, very rarely gets that opportunity at City. He's often used out on the left, told to hold his position. Pep likes his players in those channels, and you're not allowed to leave that channel because it's a very kind of robotic system at times. He did play inside recently in a Premier League game for City and did quite well. But again, the next time he comes on the left-hand side. And again, I think if Jack was sat here with no kind of skin in the game, he would say that I would much rather play as a number 10 where everything kind of revolves around me. I can pick the ball up wherever I want instead of being stuck out on the left. I think For Pep, though, Pep has seen him be effective in that left-sided role, particularly in that treble season where he was keeping Phil Foden out of the team. Phil Foden couldn't get a game in the second half of that season. And now, for whatever reason, his form has just dipped. There have been suggestions that Pep hasn't particularly liked the way he's trained. Has watched him very closely before a Champions League game at the end of last season in Copenhagen. He kind of referenced that Grealish had been picked for that particular game because he'd performed well in training in the build-up to that particular game. Almost like a poking him, saying you were playing tonight because you trained really well. Train well again next week and you'll be in the team. So it's a constant kind of battle with Jack. Again, I'm going to stick up from a little bit in that lots of the talk around Grealish is that he doesn't score enough. Everyone will know that he's gone a calendar year, I think, without scoring and doesn't assist enough. Again, if Jack was sat here, he would say, well, that's not the be-all and end-all. That assists and goals aren't every single measure of an attacking player, and he feels there have been games where he's performed really well and not got an assist and not got a game and not got the plaudits for it, whereas someone else on the team might have scored 2 back post tap-ins and then he's man of the match and has got 50 fantasy football points, and everyone kind of thinks, oh, you're the new best player in the world.
He's quite an outdated player though, isn't he? As a winger, he's not particularly quick and he doesn't press like you're saying, and I think you look at City now, they've got Jeremy Doku, they've got Savinho, they've got Foden as well when he plays that wide. They're very quick, they're very energetic, and Grealish just isn't that. And there aren't many players like him in the game these days. Dribblers who just want to kind of create things cleverly on the edge of the box, and it's hard to see where he goes from City.
You sort of think about those players who have got almost a free role as a 10. It doesn't really exist, does it, anymore now? It's not, I know he's been linked with Tottenham, and you can sort of see him playing as a 10 for Spurs, but I can't, you couldn't see him off the left, really, even though that is a bit of an issue for them. Obviously, Son prefers to play off the left, but if you played Son through the middle, could you play Grealish out on the left? Maybe. Timo Werner's been a big disappointment on the left-hand side for Spurs. So, adding another one into the mix, maybe, but on the wages that he would command and obviously a transfer fee if it was a permanent deal, it's a big risk for a team like Tottenham to take.
I wouldn't expect him to move in January, but if he can't get back in the team ahead of the summer, I think that there would be a lot of speculation, a lot of questions about whether he could possibly carry on at City. I mean, you referenced the World Cup in terms of Marcus Rashford and something to aim for. Jack Grealish has already missed out on one major tournament that he was particularly disappointed by. I'm sure that he's targeting the 2026 World Cup, but he needs to be playing. We expect quite a big overhaul at City, if not in January, at the end of the season, because of the age profile of their squad. If he wasn't playing the start of next season, he would have to look to move because he has to be playing it. He's also that type of player who seems like he has to be playing. He has to be in that rhythm of playing week in, week out. There are players who can sort of dip out the team, then come back and make an instant impact. We've not really seen that from Jack. It seems like he needs 5 or 6 games to kind of get that rhythm and get him to his best.
We all remember that great picture, don't we, on the back of the bus that was everywhere, with Jack Grealish top off, arms aloft, he'd won the treble. I remember Dwight York saying after he won it at Man United that for him that was it. He thought, well, we've done it now, let's take the summer off and have a great time. And that's the image that people have of Jack Grealish. And maybe Grealish has won the treble and thought, this is brilliant. And maybe he has subconsciously switched off a little bit and he's no longer the driven player that he was because he's achieved all he expected to achieve at City. And that happens to players sometimes. They get to a point where they've done everything they can and it's like, well, let's do something else now. And I think he just wants to get that fun back again. I think he's won everything and he wants to take the shackles off and play a bit more freely.
It'd be interesting to see him in a team that based everything around him again. We saw that happen at Villa and how
that team won't win anything, will it?
Well, but that's my question. Would it?
No. I don't think it
Why?
would. Because, like James was saying, teams don't play that way anymore. Unless you're the absolute superstar player that can do that, teams don't play with that number 10 anymore because it doesn't work. So I just think he could go back to Aston Villa maybe or go to another club and have great times and play for himself or play for the team, but I don't think those teams can win anything.
Well, time for a break now, and when we come back, we'll look at just how much pressure Ange Postecoglou is under at Tottenham.
If all things were equal, that is the line that Ange Postecoglou repeated 6 times in his post-match interview after the defeat to Newcastle. James, Spurs are 12th in the league. They've lost 10 of their 20 league games this season. I think they've won 4 times in all competitions since the start of November. It feels like Ange Postecoglou should be under a lot of pressure. Is he?
Yeah, he is. And I think he's benefited to some extent from the fact that, Manchester United and Manchester City have dominated. Have just dominated the sort of back pages and a lot of the talking, over last sort of 3 or 4 months, because I was looking at the numbers on the train on the way here today, actually, and Postecoglou's last 20 games, he's won 7, lost 9. Now, you go back through the 3 managers who've lost their jobs, Conte, Mourinho, and Pochettino, they've all got a worse record than that in the final 20 games before they were sacked. And Pochettino, that included the Champions League final, by the way, the defeat to Liverpool in 2019. So it just gives you an idea from a historical perspective that this Spurs are on a really bad run. Probably they're, in that 20-game block, one of the worst runs, and that quite often sees a manager get the boot. And it does feel as though every Spurs home game is a referendum on whether Postecoglou's methods can work. And you can feel it in the stands that, yes, it's very exciting, and it's exhilarating when it's good. The Chelsea game that they lost the other week, 4-3, a very, very good example. They went 2-0 up, and they look world beaters, and you're thinking, okay, this is coming together, and they're doing this with all the players that are missing. They're still committed to this, full-throated, and it's fantastic. And then they just get completely picked apart in the second half. And suddenly they're caught 3v2 time and time again, and they concede a lot of the same goals. And I think this is what is really starting to undermine Postecoglou, is that he's extremely stubborn, and he believes that his methodology does not need tweaking whatsoever. It's been successful at Celtic, it's been successful in Japan, it's been successful with Australia. I don't need to change. This is what works. Just let me finish the point. They concede the same type of goals over and over again. They get caught on the counter-attack time after time. They get caught from set pieces time after time. And when he talks about, we don't need a set-piece specialist, all this talk about, and there are some clubs, and he would probably point to Arsenal as being, there's a mural of Nico Jova, their set-piece coach, on the wall outside the Emirates Stadium. You could argue that's going too far the other way, right? But there's certainly been a trend in the last couple of years towards dedicating time towards set pieces, and yet Postecoglou is almost dismissive of the idea of having a specialist set piece coach. I've never had one. We don't need it. It's not a problem. You're conceding too many goals, and because of these issues, there's such easy sticks to beat him with that the football isn't good enough, and the results aren't coming to offset the long-standing and consistent problems that this team has.
Now, we're recording this episode before the first leg of the Carabao Cup semi-final against Liverpool. But between now and the middle of next week, they've got Carabao Cup semi-final first leg, FA Cup third round tie at Tamworth, which is a classic FA Cup tie, non-league team, and then they've got the North London derby next midweek. So that is a massive week for Tottenham. But what does Ange have to get out of that to avoid being in a very difficult situation by the end of next week?
Well, he's got the benefit of the fact that the second leg of the Carabao Cup isn't for a few weeks. So unless they get hammered in that first leg, it's not going to be a case of,
Which is possible.
Which is possible, but it's, that tie should not be over after the first leg, all things being equal, to borrow Ange's phrase.
Should have done that in an Australian accent.
So that's really important, because although he doesn't value that competition, and he's repeatedly on record saying we should be going for the Premier League, we should be thinking bigger, and I remember having a big exchange with him last season about Champions League qualification, and sort of saying, but is this not a good stepping stone towards building a squad? And he's saying, but it doesn't mean anything. Look at Newcastle, they got in it, did it really do much for them? And I was trying to say, well, yes, financially it did, and it enabled them to maybe accelerate the bigger picture, go after more ambitious players in the market, and just where you are as a club, as the status of the club. He doesn't see the League Cup as being something that can do that. But I tell you what, if you went to Tottenham and you polled 60,000 fans and said, do you want to win something this season? They'd take anything. It's been 17 years since they won a trophy.
It's quite a miserable kind of perspective he has, isn't it? The cups don't matter. It's about getting the Champions League. Because you're right, Tottenham fans are desperate to win a trophy. Most club fans are desperate to win a trophy. But Tottenham, because they are a club that... They're a big club that has got a tradition in the past, and they have that potential to be a big club again that wins things. But I suppose Spurs and Newcastle are the two most underperforming teams in the game. They should be winning trophies. It's not like you talk about a mid-ranking club that's never had a tradition of winning things. Tottenham have won things.
They're not in a position to pick and choose.
Absolutely.
But Postecoglou believes that they should be. He thinks that the progress that they're making, if everybody was fit, he thinks they're comfortably a top 4 team. He thinks they could be going for the league. That's where he feels they should be. But what are they? What are they at the moment? 12th? Yep. They're miles off it. They're obviously not going to win the league this year. They're probably not going to get in the top 4.
There's also an element there of maybe sometimes managers need to read the room. And I went to the Carabao Cup quarter-final at Spurs with you on the tube towards the stadium. Was listening to some fans talk about how they felt that Man United game was the biggest game of their season. Now, I'm sure there was a little bit of like, oh, it's the next game and all that sort of stuff that's attached to it. But the gist of their point was that was their best chance of a trophy this season, which made the Man United game the biggest game of their season. And then you switch on the TV and listen to your manager sort of dismiss it a little bit.
He's not very good, is he, managing the message? I remember last season at the Arsenal or the Man City game, and he was raging at the Tottenham fans for the suggestion that Spurs might take it easy to help Man City win the league again.
And again, read the room.
Exactly, his messaging is really poor, and I don't know if it's part of an act with Ange or whether it's the real him, but it projects the image that he finds it all a bit hard going. It's like he doesn't really understand why people don't get it or don't get him. That he knows better than everybody else. His idea is the best, and if you don't get it, well, you're wrong.
I think he's had a few wake up calls like that. I mean, we're talking about cup competitions. Last season, he picked a weakened team at Fulham, and they went out
first round, wasn't it?
And there was it was August, and it was a proper backlash to that. And he was, in a strong position. The team had started the Premier League season well. He's obviously coping with the loss of Harry Kane. He'd only just come in. It's not as if people were questioning him, but I think that really knocked him there because he sort of thought, well, it's the League Cup. This isn't a priority for us. We're as I say, we're at that point. We're thinking we can go and have a go at winning the Premier League. I think that Arsenal game was another big wake-up call for him where he did not read the room and he misjudged the feeling among the supporters that they genuinely would, because Spurs didn't have a lot to play for then, they would rather have lost and seen Arsenal not win the league than beat City and hand the title to their fiercest rivals. Now, obviously from a professional sports point of view, you never want your own team to lose a game. But again, it comes back to this stubbornness of this is how I do it and this is the only way I can see to victory, when actually you need to be a little bit more.
Is that because previously in Australia, in Japan, and in Scotland, he's managed the biggest or the most financially stable clubs in the league? So he's been in a position whereby he can dominate those leagues. He can dominate by the way that he plays. If he's Celtic coach, he can go to St Mirren and know that his tactics are going to win. You can't have that approach in the Premier League. No,
I think that's a very good point, and it linked to that is I was watching a video of Jurgen Klopp defending Trent Alexander-Arnold, because obviously there's been a lot of talk about Trent in his defending this week. And he talked about the way that they defend, and he got into this tactical sort of detail about, I ask him to be high up the pitch because I want us to win the ball high up the pitch. And if we do it, no one complains about where Trent is because we've got the ball. Yeah. And Postecoglou's philosophy is actually quite similar. If you look at what he does with his fullbacks, they play basically as number 10s when they're attacking. So that's why they're caught 3-on-2 at the back, because it's the two centre backs who tend to be the two that sit in. So because he doesn't feel he's got the attacking players that he needs, that's why his system is breaking down. It's not this, and you look at what you're asking those fullbacks to do, it's why they're injured. They've basically got no fullbacks because they're all out injured because they're being asked to go.
Running marathons every week.
Exactly. Sprinting every game. And I think that's why Spurs are in quite a difficult position in this window, because from a short-term perspective, they need defenders. They're short of cover on the left side of defence, both in fullback and in the left side of centre-half. They've obviously just gone and committed quite a significant sum of money to a goalkeeper who will not play when everybody's available and Vicario's back fit. But what Ange Postecoglou thinks he needs is strikers, is forward players. Because if you're winning the ball high up the pitch, you don't need to worry about whether you're playing your second choice left back so much, or whether you've got a right back, filling in at centre half, because your team is playing so well that is less of a problem. If the
ball's in their net, it's not in ours, kind of thing.
But if you look at it, it's almost perpetuating the sort of basketball style nature of their football. And that if you look at Tottenham from an objective viewpoint now, and you say what do they need in January, nobody would say another forward, because they're shipping too many goals at the back. But this is where they are. So do they back Postecoglou, and do they say, okay, we fully believe in this vision, we think you are right, we're going to go and get what you want? Or are they going to say, well, actually, we've got no fit centre-half, so we need to go and get someone short-term cover and maybe revisit this at the end of the season if he's still there?
So where do you think the fans are on this? Are the majority in favour of him staying? Are the majority in favour of him going? Do they think that there needs to be a change? Are they on board? And we've spoken a lot about how we feel like the message has maybe missed the mark a couple of times. Do they get it? Are they a little bit confused about some of the stuff he says in his press conferences? What's the feeling among the supporters, do you think?
I think that they're broadly supportive still, but I think that support is shrinking by the week.
Really?
I think that they were liberated to some extent by the style of football after watching Antonio Conte's real turgid play for 18 months, 2 years that he was there. But, it's a bit like a sort of summer holiday romance. You kind of get to the end of it and you're like, I want to go back to normality now. I want something a bit calmer. I think they've just got to the point where they feel, actually, although this is good to watch, I want something more than this. I want something that's a bit more meaningful. Yes, I'm turning up, I'm being entertained, I'm seeing 4, 5, 6, 7 goals a game, but where's it getting us?
This is Tottenham for the last 30 years, isn't it? Probably longer, since Ozzy Ardiles was there. It's kind of...
Which is why at the start, Daniel Levy doesn't speak much in public, but he spoke at a fans forum where he talked about, we've got our Tottenham back, and it felt very, very early at the time, but I understand why, because it was the Tottenham of the last 30 years. It was swashbuckling, it was style, it was entertaining. Not necessarily everybody's second team, but a lot of people were quite fond of Spurs because they were always habitually good to watch. I always think of the Martin Jol team. Under Jol at White Hart Lane, first 20 minutes, they were some of the best football you could see in the Premier League. They'd blow teams away, absolutely fantastic stuff, but they didn't win anything. And really, we've got to a point where Postecoglou's always felt that his methodology delivers results. He talks about, I win in my second season. Ironically, for somebody who doesn't care about the League Cup, it's the League Cup and maybe the FA Cup that could actually save his job.
I feel a bit sorry for Spurs fans. I think I read somewhere that the second highest price season ticket in all of Europe, and eventually fans are going to want something to show for it, aren't they? For paying that amount of money, they've got a shiny brand new stadium, but eventually they're going to want something a bit more real.
The training ground's phenomenal. One of the best in the league. The stadium, I think, is arguably the best in Europe. It's absolutely phenomenal stadium. Just a pleasure from a work perspective to be able to go and sit and watch a game and work there every time you go. The problem is the team. It doesn't win. And they felt they were so close under Pochettino. They felt the winning mentality was not quite there. So they go and get a proven winner, Jose Mourinho. Doesn't work out. Okay, maybe Mourinho's, not quite the proven winner he was, so we'll get another one. Antonio Conte doesn't work. I'm missing Nuno Espirito Santo out for this.
Because he doesn't care.
It's the best of the lot.
Because he wasn't there long enough. Although, maybe he was the winner they needed all along. But, it doesn't work out. Disagreements. The team gets a bit older, and that's the other thing. Obviously Kane's gone. Son's now into his 30s. Yeah, I think it's very difficult for Spurs fans to think of a world without Kane and Son. But we are getting to a stage over the next 18 months, 2 years, where Son may not be there. And what is the new look team? What is that Pochettino team that got to a Champions League final is consigned to history, kind of once and for all?
So we're looking at Ange. Maybe he's not the issue. The reason why the fans are protesting against Daniel Levy, the guy who chooses all these managers, it's right from the top, isn't it? It's the mentality at the top. It's the priorities. It's the acquisitions. It's the signings, it's the spending, it's the appointments.
There's certainly a lot to be said for that. There's a whole podcast, in that point really, that Spurs have got themselves to the brink a couple of times. I always think, Harry Redknapp 2011-12 when they were going for the league and he wanted Carlos Tevez, and he got Louis Saha, and he wanted Gary Cahill, and he got Ryan Nelson, and they missed out on the league. And you just thought, that's the window where you could have gone for it. And Pochettino, similarly, he talks the last sort of year or so, he talked about we need to think like a big club. He was only talking to Daniel Levy when he was talking about that.
The story about the watches, the Hugo Lloris story about the watches, is classic, isn't it? Give all the players were given watches as Champions League finalists before the game against Liverpool. Now, Liverpool would never do that. Liverpool gets to the final and lose it. They don't do anything. They go on the holidays. Tottenham, if they're giving watches to their players for getting to the final, they're handing out the watches before they even played the game. That shows you the mentality is wrong. It's just wrong from the very basics that you're there to win, not to have a nice day in Madrid and wear a nice watch with finalist on the back of it. You want to win his medal.
It's time for another break, but when we come back, we'll be talking about the magic of the FA Cup.
So to finish, let's talk about the FA Cup third round. All games are live on ESPN Plus in the United States this weekend from Thursday through to Monday. And obviously the tie of the round is Arsenal versus Manchester United. The holders United against the record winners of the competition, Arsenal. So huge game. James, what do you think about Arsenal's perspective? Is it a game that they are desperate to win? They haven't been past the fourth round since they won it in 2020, I don't think.
No, and Arteta's sort of been on record saying that he feels that this team needs to win trophies on a regular basis to sort of establish themselves as really validate what they've been doing and the progress they've made in the last 5 years. However, it isn't a priority for them. They are still going in full competitions. They obviously still feel they can win the Premier League. They've got the Champions League. They've got a tricky run of games actually coming up after the United game. So while they will take it seriously, I still think they will rotate 2 or 3 positions at the least, and feel that given United's general level, they'll have enough to get through.
Rob, United are the holders, but it's a pretty tough first game to defend their crown. So third round Arsenal away. Is it a priority for Amorim, or is he going to save his place for the Premier League game against Southampton next week?
Well, he has spoken about knowing the value of a trophy, and I think he realises that to win something would kind of buy him a lot more time. But then we saw against Spurs in the Carabao Cup that he played Bayindir and not Onana. He made some changes. I think he went with a weakened or a weaker team at Tottenham than perhaps a lot of fans that were expecting. You've referenced at the Southampton game there that they are still in a sticky situation in the Premier League, and they've got a game against Southampton at home on the Thursday, and then Brighton, I think, at home on the Sunday. It's a massive game against Arsenal in the Cup, but you would argue in United's situation that the Southampton and the Brighton games are bigger for Amorim and Man United. I think though that you need to show something at the Emirates, given the fuss he made of the performance at Anfield. You can't make such a big deal of the performance against Liverpool and then pick a weakened team to get well beaten against Arsenal. He needs to start building some momentum. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of team he picks. I think sort of all options are open. I
think one thing about the FA Cup that makes it so special is the fact that there's going to be a huge away following at all these grounds. There might be 9,000 United fans at Arsenal. There's going to be,
if they can get a train.
If they can get a train, that's a very kind of UK issue.
Yes.
But so, what are the storylines this weekend that are interesting to you? I mean, Rob, what's your standout cup tie this weekend?
Well, aside from Stockport County, my hometown team, obviously going to beat Palace away and cause a massive cup upset. Salford playing City, obviously for obvious reasons. Salford owned by the class of '92. They've been stuck in League Two for a while. I think people assumed that because of the backing they had with Gary Neville, Paul Scholes, Nicky Butt, Ryan Giggs and the rest of them, that they would kind of shoot through the leagues. It's not really happened. They've got stuck in League Two and ended up kind of having to sack and appoint different managers. They are on a good run at the moment. They've won the last 6 games, third in League Two, so right in the promotion race to get promoted to League One. Obviously, I don't think anyone really is expecting them to go to Man City and win, because Pep Guardiola likes picking strong teams and sees the value in long cup runs, where it's the Carabao Cup or the FA Cup. But it's a nice story, isn't it? The class of '92, United's class of '92 come up against Man City and Pep Guardiola. And, like you say, magic of the FA Cup, you never know.
James?
Well, it's got to be Tamworth for me. I think the lowest ranked team left in the competition, and it's just a quintessential FA Cup tie, isn't it? A team like that for hosting a Premier League powerhouse, Tottenham, and the absolute worst possible game really for Ange Postecoglou. You can only lose. If they win, they're expected to win. There's no real benefit from it. They're through to the next round. But if they lose, my word, the pressure will be under them will be immense.
I was at that stadium. Well, stadium's probably a bit too strong. Ground about 3 or 4 years ago. It was the first game that Wrexham had under their Hollywood ownership of Rob McElhenney and Ryan Reynolds. And one thing that struck me was the size of it. But the ground is called the Lamb. Now, FA Cup is all about story tales and romance and lambs to the slaughter, all this sort of thing. I mean, it really has got nightmare written all over it for Ange Postecoglou and Tottenham. But I think the story that I'm looking forward to this weekend is Liverpool against Accrington Stanley. It's a game that people of a certain vintage in the UK will remember.
Do it, come on, do it.
No, I'm not doing it.
Do it.
A famous advertisement for TV commercial for milk back in the late 80s, early 90s.
What was the line, Mark?
Well, 2 kids in Liverpool shirts were saying that Ian Rush, Liverpool's greatest goal scorer at the time, said that if you didn't drink lots of milk, you'd only be good enough to play for Accrington Stanley. Prompting the response, Accrington Stanley, who are they? Exactly. I'm not doing the accent. No. Not from Manchester doing a Liverpool accent. But that story kind of actually helped Accrington as a club rebuild. Back in the 1960s, they went out of business. They went out of business and liquidated and ended up in the non-league. And in the late 80s, early 90s, the club was really, really struggling to have a future. What they actually earned a little bit of money from that commercial. They created a cult following on the back of it. And about 10, 15 years later, they regained their place in the Football League to the point where they've never lost it since. And this is the first time they've played Liverpool since that famous advert. It's not the second time ever. But also, Accrington is not far from Liverpool, and virtually all of their team is made up of Liverpudlians. They're a team that generally, since they were promoted back to the Football League 20 years ago, has basically based itself on players that didn't make the grade at Liverpool or Everton and just basically moved to Accrington to kind of relaunch their careers. So they are a team full of Scousers playing at Liverpool, at Anfield. It's a dream game. It's a game that will raise perhaps over £1 million for Accrington in terms of their finances. So that is what the FA Cup is about in many ways, that the smaller clubs that just look for this kind of almost like pot of gold at the end of the rainbow playing Liverpool away or Man United away. So Accrington standing at Liverpool for me is a really big occasion. But I think you've both got some of your favourite FA Cup stories. I think we'll start with Europe.
I think we're going to start with James. James has been telling this story off camera, so it's time.
Well, the story that springs to mind is Sutton 0, Arsenal 2 from February 2017, which is a game that lingers in the memory for Wayne Shaw, the Sutton goalkeeper, eating a pie on the touchline that in a bookmaker stunt that ended up getting him a fine and a ban. Yeah. So, but the reason that I remember it is because obviously, as a non-league club, their media facilities are sort of thin on the ground, and after the game, Wenger basically had to have his post-match press conference kind of on the pitch, but because the fans were still milling about, and obviously there's not the sort of same level of security at a ground like that, they took him into the tunnel and they said, right, there's only room down there for a couple of journalists to come down and do it, so let's grab a couple of people, come down and do it and share the quotes to everyone else. And me and a colleague went down, and I was stood with my colleague Mark and Arsene Wenger. We were, very, very close together, right in the corner of this tunnel next to the Sutton dressing room. And it had come at a time when Wenger was under almighty pressure at Arsenal. He was, the fan base was divided. He was, he didn't look particularly well. It was really taking its toll on him. But honestly, as the Sutton players were coming out of the dressing room and sort of, they went to turn right and they looked left and they saw Arsene Wenger stood there and they were like, went back, got their phone, can I have a picture? Yeah, sure. Oh, could you sign my shirt? All this stuff. Wenger's face lit up. The colour came back into his face. He looked, 10 years younger. That was the magic of the FA Cup right there for me.
My favourite stories are always about how the lower league teams try to press their advantage when big teams visit their stadiums, and you hear stories about lower league teams turning the heating off in the away dressing rooms, taking the flush off the toilets in the cubicles so they can't use the toilet. Blacking out, putting blackout blinds over the windows so the entire dressing room is completely pitch black. And that's part of the kind of the lore of the FA Cup, isn't it? That you get these massive teams who are used to fantastic facilities coming to these small grounds and these small facilities, and on the lower league teams obviously doing everything they possibly can to make that advantage count, whether it's leaving the grass on the pitch too long so the better team can't pass the ball, or watering the pitch when it's already muddy to make sure that they can't play properly. It's always the case that these managers come out afterwards, don't they, and moan about it and say it's not right, and it can't be, it's not fair, but it's part of the tradition of the FA Cup, all these big teams struggling at these tiny little grounds.
Yeah, listen, the FA Cup at both ends of the scale, it's got great stories. The one that always stands out for me is when Man United beat Liverpool 2-1 in the FA Cup. I think the third or fourth round in 1999. Everybody talks about the treble win that year when Solskjaer scored in stoppage time in Barcelona to win the European Cup. But that game, I think into January that year, Solskjaer scored another injury time winner to win that game against Liverpool in the FA Cup, and it was just a crazy game, and that was a game that really kind of propelled United towards the treble. There were other games, the Juventus game, the Arsenal FA Cup semi-final, the game in the final, but that was a game that really set United on the way. But if you're looking for kind of romance and the FA Cup nonsense, I guess, as writers, I don't know, my view with the FA Cup is if you go into a game that involves a minnow at home to a big club, what you don't want is a surprise. You just want it to be nice and straightforward. No drama, no romance. Just keep it as simple as possible so you can get the job done and get out. And there have been a few occasions where I've been to grounds and there's been upsets at Oldham beating Liverpool one year when the striker was a guy that was best mates with Jack Whitehall, the comedian. He was about 6'7", and he was the story was about this guy Matt Smith knowing Jack Whitehall, this comedian. I was at Mansfield one year when Luis Suarez scored a handball goal to get a result for Liverpool, and I was sat in the stands with the laptop on my knee, cramped up, having just had a hernia operation 2 weeks before, so that almost went back in hospital. But I remember as a young freelancer being sent to Southport versus Notts County. Southport were non-league, and it was 2-0 to Notts County at half-time. Nice and easy, league team winning the game. 6 paragraphs, one order, no problem. Southport managed to turn it around the second half and won 4-2. And there's a guy called Steve Pickford, who I think was a carpet fitter or something like that, scored the winning goal. So I went from having one nice and easy 6-par job to having 11 different newspapers to service. I'll never forget that it was like, well, you go to an FA Cup tie and you could be really, really busy or really quiet and get home nice and early. But that was a day when it told me that the FA Cup can ruin your weekend, basically.
Well, that's all for this week. Thanks for joining us. We'll be leaving the show in the capable hands of our reporters in Spain to talk the 3-way title race in La Liga. For now, goodbye.